Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode from the RPA Vanguard channel. My name is Andy Menon. In this video, we are going to be talking about how to work with the date and time data type in UiPath apps. Let's get started. A few weeks ago, I had released a video on creating an automation UI feedback loop using UiPath apps, right? And if you have watched that video, then this screen must be familiar to you. So one of the things that you saw on this screen was the display of the start time and the current time, right? The start time is generated by the UiPath app, and the time now is returned by a UiPath automation, right? And if you observe closely, you can see that although the date and time data type returned by the UiPath app and the automation look to be the same, they are not exactly alike, right? Basically, if you look at the time format or the date and time format returned by the UiPath automation and compare that to the date and time generated by the app, you see that there are subtle differences, right? And so this led me to think if there would be a situation where if we have to compare a date time data type that is returned by an automation, right, in an app, right? What if I want to take this date time data type and then compare it by generating a date time data type in the UiPath app, right? And that is going to be the central theme of this video. So what you're going to be seeing next will be one of the ways in which we could compare these two date time data types. For this exercise, we'll need a UiPath app and a companion UiPath automation. And this is the automation that you're seeing open here in UiPath Studio. This is a very simple automation. What it basically does is it generates a natural date time, right? Basically, it uses the datetime.now function and then generates the natural date time. And then it takes the result of the first step, which is the out current date time variable, and then converts that into a string and formats it to the 24-hour time format in the US Eastern time zone, right? That is all what it does, right? And then as outputs, it returns these two variables out. So one is the natural date time, right, which is the current date time, and the other is the string form of that date time formatted to the standard US Eastern time zone, right? The one thing that you will have to observe when doing the formatting is that the time format is in the 24-hour format. It is not in the 12-hour format, right? And it is a good practice to have date times passed as 24-hour formats because it takes away the ambiguity of having to deal with the AM and PM identifiers in time, right? And therefore, the conversion here has been set to the 24-hour time format. Switching to the UiPath Assistant, you can see that this automation that I just showed you has already been deployed to the orchestrator. And the name of the process of that automation is the date string generator, right? And here on the left, you see a UiPath app. Basically, it's a test rig, and it is designed to demonstrate the date and time functions of UiPath apps in the most basic manner. So what this app does is that it has a button called Get Process DateTime. And as the name suggests, when I click this button, the app invokes this process. And this process executes and it outputs the two DateTime outputs that we saw in the UiPath Studio project. And then it populates the label controls that are shown here. So one is the process generated DateTime, which is the natural DateTime, and the other is the string form of the process generated date and time, right? So this is the relationship between one part of the app and the UiPath automation that has been deployed to the orchestrator. This is the UiPath app in its full glory. And the first thing that I will be doing is to hit the Get Process DateTime and invoke the automation. And the automation has run and it has returned the natural DateTime and also the string form of DateTime. Now, here you can see how the app treats the DateTime values that have been received. This is the natural DateTime generated by the automation. But then when it was fetched into a UiPath app variable and then exposed here on a label control, you can see that this date has the full format, including the GMT, right? The GMT difference, right? And you can also see how the string form of the DateTime looks like, right? This is a lot easier to work with, right? This is a lot easier, makes a lot more sense, and it is pretty standard, right? And therefore, if you pass this date and time as a standard formatted string to any external system, that external system must be able to understand this date and time format in most probability. And this will also eliminate the number of date time format differences that you may have when you're integrating different systems, right? So this is the process side of it. Now let us switch to the UiPath app side of it and look at how the UiPath app generates date and time. And the function that is available to generate a full date time in a UiPath app is the now function, right? So if you use the now function and then fetch the current date time value and expose it in a label, this is how it looks like, right? And you can see how different this is from the full form of the natural date time that was generated by the UiPath automation, right? So this is the first difference, right? The appearance is markedly different. So what we do is we follow the same procedure that we followed in the UiPath automation side of things. We take a date or a date time that looks pretty complex and try to reduce it to something that is more manageable, right? And for that, we use a combination of the UiPath app date and date functions and also a few expressions, and then we generate a more manageable version of the date and timestamp. But here is the problem. Although this looks very similar to the date time generated from the automation, they are not exactly identical, right? The first problem is if you observe the components of the date or time, the UiPath apps return single-digit values for the day, the month, and the hour and the minutes, right? So if your month is less than 10, then it generates 8, not 08, right? Similarly, if the date is less than 10th of the month, then it generates a single digit. So although they appear the same, they are not the same. And the other critical difference between this time format and this time format is the process generated timestamp has the seconds value, whereas there is no seconds function in UiPath apps. And therefore, if you look at the accuracy of this timestamp, it is accurate down to the minute, whereas the date timestamp generated by the process is accurate down to the seconds, right? And therefore, even if you want to compare the two timestamps as is, I don't think we'll be able to do it given the current state of affairs of UiPath apps. Therefore, we have to look for a couple of fixes or solutions and come up with a compromise solution on how to compare the date time generated by the automation and the date time generated by the UiPath app. So next, what we do is we look at the app date and time functions before we come back to this section here, right? If I invoke the UiPath day function, the month function, and the year function, you can see the values that they have returned. They have returned a single digit day, a single digit month, and the full year. So as is, there is no problem with the year function, but the day and month function both return single digit values if you are in a single digit month and or a single digit day. So going to the time side of things, it generates the hour. Luckily, the hour is in the military format, which is the 15th hour of the day, which is here in the US right now is 3 p.m. And the minutes are 31, and there is no app function for seconds. So you cannot get the seconds component of the date time, right? And like I said, if you were to run this page, let us say at 8 a.m. in the morning, then your hour will also be single digit, right? Therefore, this problem of single digit date and time components exist throughout the UiPath app functions. It's not exactly a problem, it's the way it works. It's a feature of the UiPath apps, and we have to do something to reconcile before we begin to work with date and time comparisons, right? So how do we run the comparison now? For that, I have a couple of buttons here. What I'm going to do is first refresh the process date time. The reason I'm going to do that is because it takes a longer time for us to get the date time generated by the UiPath automation and bring it back to the app, right? Whereas if I click on this link here, refreshing the date and time stamp here on the app side is instantaneous. So obviously I generate this date time first from the automation, and then I'm going to refresh the date time here, right? So I'm going to hit get process date time again. There it is. It is 1621, which is about 421 here in the US. And now, if I hit this button and check to see if the date times are equal, I will get a response whether the date and times are equal. It says the two date times do not match, right? Which is correct. Now let me refresh the timestamp on the app side. So I hit this link. You have to observe it a bit closely because the refresh is almost instant. But here you can see that the date and timestamps are equal up to the minute, right? So here it is 1621, and here also it is 1621. Now, if I click on this button, now it says that the date times are a match. And therefore, there is a way to mitigate the situation of comparing the date and time data types between the value returned from the automation with the value generated on the app side. But we'll have to have some compromises, right? And the first compromise is basically to compare the date and timestamps up to the accuracy of the minute, not the second, right? Because we do not have that feature in the app, right? And the second would be to format the date and time components to be double digit, so that the formats are identical to the maximum extent as possible between the automation and the app. So let's take a look at how to arrive at this this format of the date time on the UiPath app. I'm in the UiPath App Studio, and this is the app that you saw in action a short while ago. I am not going to be talking much about this section. This is very, very simple, and by this time, I would expect the audience to know how to pull in UiPath Automation and then invoke that in the UiPath app, right? So this part is very simple, so I'm going to skip that. This is the part that we are going to be focusing on, right? So in this section, there is the first line, and there is an expression here. And the expression is bound to a variable called var app DateTime. And if I go into the main page, get into the loaded event, what I have done is I have captured the DateTime value into a variable. Here you can see that it invokes the now function and then captures that into this variable, right? Going back, we go to the second line, and what we do is we invoke the app date functions and also expressions to generate this value of the time, or this format of the time, because like I said, this format is very verbose and very exhaustive, and you need to reduce it down to something more manageable, right? So here is another expression, and that expression is a combination of the UiPath DateTime functions and also the concat function, right? So we'll take a look at this function first, because if we understand how this function is written, then it would be easy to understand the third line here. And on the third line, here is another expression, and you can see that this is a bit more exhaustive than the expression here in the second line, right? So we'll start with this line here, and then we'll go into the function that's been written here, and then we can expand that out to the function that applies the correction on the date and time components. And here I am in Notepad, and here is the expression that I have used on the process side to generate the 24-hour standard formatted date time as a string, right? So if I invoke this in the UiPath automation, I get this value, right? This is the value that I get. This is pretty basic. I think we all have been familiar with this by now. And right, this is what we get. Now, on the app side, if I invoke now, I get something very verbose, right? This is what I get. So how do we reduce it down to something manageable? For that, we cover the month function of the UiPath App DateTime function, the day function, the year, the hour, and the minute. And like I said, there is no function to retrieve the seconds component of the date and time, right? So this is pretty simple. You take the month, you concat a / the day, the year, all separated by / and then there's a space. And then the hour component, the colon, and the minute component, right? And doing this will return this format of the date and time, right? You get this in return, right? So there is no seconds function. And the other problem is if you are anywhere between the month of January and the month of September, and anywhere between the 1st of the month and the 9th of the month, you will have these problems. Similarly, you will have the same problem with the time if you are running this anywhere before the 10th hour of the day, right? So you can see that this is a problem, right? So how do we convert this into something like this? Right? How do we take this? And if I put that side by side or one below the other, you can see we have appended leading zeros to the single digit components, right? So how do we do that? So what we'll do is we'll write an expression for the day, and then we'll figure out how that works, and then we can extend that out to all other components of the date and time, right? And here is the expression for padding a single digit day with a leading zero, right? So what we are saying is sorry, this must be month. I'm sorry, this should be month. So padding a single digit month with a leading zero. So I take the month function and I get the month component, and I say if the month is less than or equal to 9, if that is true, which is true now because this is August, we concat a leading zero to the month component of the date. If not, we return the month component of the date as is, right? Basically, this condition will be true up until the month of September, right? In which case, this condition will be returned or executed in the if condition. And after the month of September, when we step into October, this will be false, and therefore the month, which is a double-digit month, will be returned, right? So on the surface, it looks like it's going to work. This is wrong. This will not work. This is wrong and will not work, right? Now you might ask me why. The reason is very subtle, and you can get stuck with this. And the reason is it has to do with how the if condition works in any programming language, right? Look at the function carefully. You're telling the if function that if the month value is less than or equal to 9, you're asking it to return a string, right? So if the month is 8, this month is August 8, and this condition is true, you're asking it to return a string 08, right? So this is the first condition will return 08, and 08 is a string, right? Now imagine you're running this function in October, and what happens in October is this condition is going to be false. And if this condition is false, you are telling the if condition to return the month of the date, right? And in this case, it is going to return 10, and it is a number. See the problem? The if function has to return either string or number, but not both, right? So this function is a bit muddled now, right? In one case, you're telling it to return string. In another case, you're telling it to return a number. And this is going to cause a problem, right? So what we are going to do is apply a slight tweak on this if condition and make it work the way we want to, right? And let's take a look at how to apply that tweak. So the tweak is pretty simple, right? Tweak the if function, right? If function to return strings in both true and false cases, right? So what is the tweak? The tweak is pretty simple. I'm going to remove this. I don't need this right now. Here you can see again, nothing changes here. If month is less than or equal to 9, then return 0 concatenated with the month of the current date, which is okay. This is correct. This is going to work. But here, you are going to concat an empty string to the month value, right? So concatenating a string to whatever this month function has to return will compel the app or the UiPath if function to return a string. So in which case, this is how it's going to work. So up until September, you're going to get a string, right? Which is good. And in October, you're going to still get back 10, but it is going to be a string form of the number 10. So now this is going to work throughout the year. And the if function is going to return the right value the way we want it. And the month component of the date will always be a double-digit number. So now that we have seen how to do this for one component of the date and time, let us extend this to every other applicable component of the date and time. Basically, you have to extend it to the day of the month, and you have to extend it to the hour of the day, and you have to extend it to the minute of the hour, right? So I'm going to pull up an expression next that will show you how this entire logic has been applied to the date and time timestamp in entirety, right? And here is the app expression to format the date and time by applying the 2-digit correction, right? And here is the section that you saw for the month. Here it is. So if I ignore this for now, I return the month. So in this case, the month returned will be 08. And then I return the day. Today, in this case, it will be, I think, 06. And the year has no problems. It's a 4-digit year. So we are going to just stick with year of the date value. But for the hour, we are going to do the same thing. If the hour of the day is less than or equal to 9, we are going to pad the hour with a 0. Similarly, we are going to pad the minute with a 0 if that minute is going to be less than or equal to 9, right? In all cases, you can see that both components of the if function return the value as strings, right? Now that you have the individual components of the date and time, the only thing that is remaining is for us to concatenate all components that are corrected using the date and time separators, right? So for that, we can use concat, and then the month separated by /, the day separated by /, followed by the year. That is followed by a blank space, the hour separated by a colon, and followed by the minute. So the result that we get out of the concatenation operation will be something like this. Obviously, your results will differ based on what day and time of the year you're running this. This is one way of writing it, right? And what you can do is you can try the other way of writing it. I have not tried it, but it would be a good exercise for the audience to try. instead of using the concat function, you might want to write it this way. Instead of comma, you do the ampersand sign, and here you can see the difference. I have completely ditched the concat function, right? And because the concat function has been skipped, the commas are all gone, and in its place is the append operator, right? And because these are strings, you can append the result of each corrected factor or component of the date and time, and then use the ampersand to concatenate the components of the date. This is something that you might want to try. I personally like the concat function because I don't like to see a lot of ampersands in my expression. And therefore, I try to stick to the concat function, especially if the expression is complex, such as this, right? So we have now, at this point, applied the correction for the date and timestamp on the UiPath app side, right? But that still leaves us the question of how do we compare the date time of a process with the date time of an app, right? It still leaves us that question, right? So let's take a look at the two values of the date and time, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this process date time value, and then I'm going to take the UiPath app date time value and stick it underneath this value, right? So how do we compare these dates and times? Like I said, the first compromise is you do not compare it at the accuracy level of the second. So that is out of the question. So let's compromise here for a bit, and let's agree that we are going to compare the date and times on both sides at the accuracy level of the minute, right? So how do we do it? If you observe the date and time values on the first line and the second line, you will see that the date time of the app is contained inside the date time of the process, right? So in UiPath apps, there is a function called contains. And what you're basically doing with the contains function is you are asking it whether string A is contained in string B, right? That's all it is. And if the date times are equal, then 8/6/2022/16/21 is contained inside 8/6/2022/16/21/01, right? So this condition is true. If the date times are equal at the minute accuracy level, then process date time will contain app date time. So in other words, will return true and the date times are equal. Now let us say one of the components in the app generated time will change, right? Let us say I take this line and write something different. Will return false and date times are not equal, right? So here you can see that 8/6/2022/16/31 is not contained in 8/6/2022/16/21, right? In which case the date times are not equal. So you can use this logic to make a comparison of the date time that is received from a process with a DateTime value that is somehow generated on the app side, right? So let's go back to this demo now that we know the logic. Let's go back into the app and look at the logic of our DateTimes equal, right? So going back to the app, getting into this button here, events, and here you can see that I have said that if contains the process DateTime string with the app DateTime fixed format, right? When I say fixed format, it means I've applied the fix, right? If that is true, then you say the date times match. If not, the dates and times do not match, right? If I click this button now, these two will evaluate to true because, as I said earlier, up to the accuracy level of the minute, these two dates are equal, right? I'm going to hit this. Great. I'm going to now refresh the app timestamp. And now, if you look at it, there is no way 1655 is contained inside 1621. And if I hit, they do not match. So that's pretty much it. That is how you compare the date and time data type that you have received in string format from UiPath Automation with a date and time value generated in a UiPath app. I'm going to share this code with you, and I hope you give this a shot. But that is all for this video, and I hope that you learned something new. And if you did, please do like and subscribe to the RPA Vanguard channel. I'll truly appreciate it. Thank you, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.